Okay, hello everyone. We're just going to wait a little bit longer. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you may be. Please get yourselves comfortable. Super exciting to see the people on the waiting room and the participant list growing. So let's just give it a little bit more time for people to join us. Okay. So I'm just checking the participant list again. We might be encountering some technical challenges in terms of internet connection, so we do apologize for that from the onset. Please bear with us. We know how these things work. Okay, so I think I'm going to start, and then we will just slowly see how this goes. I might also be, just for you to know, whoever is listening to me, I might be inviting people on and off screen. Okay, so that is part of the session. So please don't feel lost if someone disappears from the screen and someone else comes in. Okay, so thank you so much. And welcome everyone once again. So this panel and our presence here today, we're bringing together speakers from India, from Curaçao, and from Singapore to present on their experiences engaging in the study and safeguarding of languages that have resulted out of and or have been profoundly affected by colonialism. This is without a doubt a complex situation that many people around the world are still dealing with. I would also like to point out that we will be entering the UN Decade of Indigenous Languages 2022 to 2032. I think it's 22. And anyway, we are entering this decade. And so we can see how urgent and how important it is evermore to raise awareness about Indigenous languages and about languages safeguarding in general. So today we are honored to welcome our three speakers. I'm just going to briefly mention their names. I'm going to give a short introduction to what we're going to do, and then I will invite each of the speakers to present. So we are honored today to welcome Professor Ronald Herszberg, who's actually here with me on screen. He's currently a professor of language education in the Faculty of Arts at the University of Curaçao. I would also like to welcome Nishaant Choksi, who is currently an assistant professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Gandhinagar in Gujarat, India. And I apologize if I mispronounce the words in other languages. I'm really sorry for that. And finally, a huge welcome also to Kevin Martens Wong, who serves as the founder and director of Kodrah Kristang in Singapore. So this event is organized by the Indigenous Studies Discussion Group, which is a graduate student-led initiative at the University of Cambridge. It started in 2019 with the objective to provide a platform for discussing issues affecting Indigenous peoples across disciplines, times, and geographies. We are kindly supported by the Cambridge Heritage Research Center. Now, our panel will be live as soon as the live broadcast ends on this link, okay? So there will be a recording of this event soon on YouTube. Please do follow the discussion group on social media, and please do send them feedback, queries, and suggestions of what you would like to see as future events. Then this event we are having today will take around 1 hour and 30 minutes in total. Please submit questions in the chat or in the Ask a Question box that is in the bottom part of your screen. You can submit or vote on questions that have already been asked, and you can also prioritize them over others if you see you would like me to touch upon that during the discussion part. You are more than welcome to give us some sentences or greetings in your language, because above all, this is what it is about. And we want this to be a safe environment for the sharing of research and of ideas. If you do experience any issues related with inappropriate behavior or comments, please do let us know. Again, we want this to be a safe environment, and I hope everyone can cooperate in that. Now, I am conscious I am using, or I will be using, the word safeguarding. Languages are quite dynamic, they're fluid, they're in constant change. And safeguarding is about transmitting knowledge of these languages, sustaining and negotiating meanings, but it is also about strengthening and reinforcing contexts where these languages can be used and can mean something for us. So this is how I will use the word safeguarding very broadly, okay? I will also, and this is a very personal stance, when I say the word Creole, I mean language. There's no hierarchy here. We could have an entire panel just on the concept of Creole. So now I would also like to acknowledge we are speaking in English. In an event about safeguarding languages, instead of speaking our, well, in my case, my very endangered language, and using translators. So this means something. I'm also aware that the poster we used to advertise this event makes reference to written languages, and there are many languages that do not have a written script. This does not in any way make them less important. So we're aware of this, but I did hope you liked the poster. And finally, my name is Mariana. My pronouns are she, her. I am from the Portuguese descendant community in Macau, China. We are known as the Macanese. And I am a PhD candidate at the Cambridge Heritage Research Center, and I will be moderating this panel. A big thank you to Oliver, Nishaant, and Daniel for the opportunity and space to talk about this really vital topic. And again, my apologies for any technical glitches. Please bear with us, and thank you for your patience. Of course, none of this would be possible without our three invited speakers, whom I will very shortly be inviting to share their presentation with us. And of course, without you, the audience that are here with us today, whom we hope to inspire and to push for more action regarding language safeguarding and awareness. Now, without further ado, I am going to introduce Professor Dr. Ronald Severing, who is a professor of language education in the Faculty of Arts at University of Curaçao, with a focus on Papiamento and Dutch. He was the managing director of the National Institute for Language Planning of Curaçao from 1998 till 2014. He obtained master's degrees in Dutch language and literature at Nijmegen. Well, Professor, I'm sorry, you probably have to correct me on this.
All right.
And socio and applied linguistics at Tilburg, and his PhD at the University, of that's it. I'm so sorry. Anyway, in the Netherlands. So that's the most important, is that the PhD was in the Netherlands. So Professor Dr. Ronald Severing's dissertation reports on a longitudinal empirical study of literacy and school success in Curaçao into the acquisition of Papiamento and Dutch. So together with local groups of authors, he has also published textbooks and manuals for all education levels in Papiamento and Dutch. So hello, Professor. I'm going to invite Oliver, who's going to help us with your presentation. So I'm going to invite Oliver now, and he will be helping us to share your PowerPoint screen. So please bear with us for a little bit. We're just waiting for Oliver to join us. Hello, I can see people have already started to write on the chat. Okay. Hello, Oliver. So Oliver, please, whenever you feel comfortable with sharing the PowerPoint. And then Professor Ronald, whenever you are ready.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mariana, for the introduction and for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts about our language Papiamento in a colonial and post-colonial context. I must certainly also thank Oliver very much for his invitation. And on the second slide, as you can see here on the PowerPoint sheet, you can turn to the second sheet, Oliver, please.
Oliver, can you hear us? Oh, yes, there it is. Okay.
Thank you. I'll start with an overview of my presentation. After a short introduction to the context of the island, I will tell you something about Papiamento as a language in the colonial period. Then we move on to the position of Papiamento in the post-colonial period. Next, I'll try to show you some of the most recent and most important achievements, and I will then end with some closing notes. The title of my introduction to the topic in this panel is Papiamento in colonial and post-colonial context. I will do my best not to exceed the allotted 20 minutes. Let's start with a map of the Caribbean just for some orientation. That's the next slide, slide number 3.
Just a moment, let me reshare the screen. I think I did it incorrectly. Just 1 second.
Okay, I'll wait. Okay, nice. It's the right slide. The 3 islands, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao, called the ABC Islands, are located just off the coast of mainland South America. The largest and most populous island of Curaçao is located about 75 kilometers from Venezuela, 900 kilometers north of the ABC Islands. Just follow the arrow. ABC Islands are the SSS Islands, Seba, St. Eustatius, and St. Martin. These 6 Caribbean islands, together with the Western European country of the Netherlands, form the Kingdom of the Netherlands. 300,000 people live on the islands, while the Netherlands, as the largest partner in the kingdom, has 17 million inhabitants. In the next slide, we can see just an overview, and also their languages, or their language is called, or let's say, the early Amerindian inhabitants of the ABC Islands are the Caquetillos. Also, their language is called Caquetillo. It belongs to the Arawak language family. In addition to the ABC Islands, these original inhabitants also had their habitat in northwestern Venezuela. The SSS Islands were populated by the Carib Indians. At the present, the language spoken in the 3 ABC Islands is Papiamento, and the local variant of English is the common language in the SSS Islands. Today, we mainly limit ourselves to the language of the ABC Islands, or the Leeward Islands, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao. We will mainly be talking about the largest island, Curaçao, and that's where I'm right now, talking to you. On the next slide, you can see words in yellow and darker yellow. The darker part is about the Dutch colonization. So the Caquetillo Indians lived on the islands in pre-colonial period until the Spaniards arrived in Curaçao in 1499. In 1615, the 2,000 Indians in Curaçao were brought to Santo Domingo to work there. Subsequently, the Dutch conquered the island from the Spaniards in 1634 because of the well-protected harbor that certainly benefited the slave trade with Africans. And after 2 English periods, the islands remained in the hands of the Dutch as a colony from 1816. The port city of Willemstad gradually acquired an international commercial character, which meant that speakers of many languages met. In a diary, you can turn to the next slide, Oliver, please, thank you. In a diary, we can read that as early as 1702, on the island, a language was used that resembled broken Spanish. A name for this language has not yet been mentioned. Later reports of a court hearing in 1747 in the United States read how shipmen state that in Curaçao they mainly speak Popamento, broken Spanish and broken Dutch, as they called it. This is the first mention of the name Papiamento. Equally important is the discovery of the oldest known text in Papiamento from 1775. I think we can go to slide number 7. A Dutch teacher who was sent to the island in 1816 to set up public education writes in a book about the island of Curaçao. He writes the following about the local language to inform his fellow countrymen in the Netherlands about the islands, and I quote in a translation from Dutch. It's my own translation. The former inhabitants of this island, being Indians, coming under Spanish oppression, originated this mishmash of jargon, which was modified later on due to the arrival of the Dutch. Papiament, from papiar to talk, consists of bad Spanish, Indian and Dutch, poor in words, without grammatical distinctions, but rich in strongly spoken sharp sounds from the throat, and particularly in abusive words. This cackle is unbearable for the finer ear of the European upon his first arrival, and one finds it difficult to get used to its gobbling sound. Not only the Negroes, mulattoes, and other colored persons speak this jargon, but also the whites, especially the white Creoles, whose children, breastfed by negresses, from whom they receive the first impressions, speak only Creole or Papiament, and afterwards generally learning the Dutch or Low German language poorly and imperfectly, and even more poorly as regards reading and writing. This bad habit, particularly amongst the women, has taken root to such an extent that one doubts there is hope for improvement. In various families, Low German is as well known as is Arabic, although they still consider themselves of Dutch origin. The author, Paddenburg, appears particularly indignant about the Dutch women, in particular, who allowed their children to learn Papiamento from the slaves and who themselves only speak Papiamento and, even more terribly, do not even speak Dutch anymore. It thus appears that it is precisely the white women of the Dutch colonists who made Papiamento strong in the time that followed. The Catholic priests, we can now turn to the next slide, slide 8. The Catholic priests who also arrived in Curaçao at the same time, at the beginning of the 19th century, took a different approach. In order to convert the slaves and other members of the local population to the Catholic faith, they learned Papiamento, made spellings for it, and the religious texts they then wrote were also printed quite early on the printing presses of the church. The poor children learned to read and write in their native language, Papiamento. Thus, we see here the very first printed document, which is the translation of a letter from the Pope to all believers in the mission areas. It's a text from 1837. The first printed and bounded booklet was a short catechism of 1837. This booklet was registered with the UNESCO Memory of the World in 2009 as an important item of our intangible cultural heritage. Dictionaries have also been made, such as this Dutch Papiamento Dictionary of 1859, a dictionary already of 142 pages. Please, the next slide. We make some big steps through history and switch to the post-colonial era in the history of Curaçao. Like so many other colonies, the Dutch Caribbean islands became somewhat more autonomous, and in 1954, after the Second World War, they got self-government within the kingdom, and in 2010, there were again political changes. We can go to the next slide, please, Oliver. With the increase in administrative independence, attention from one's own legacy also increased. This is also the case for the native language Papiamento. The language issues about Papiamento versus Dutch caused sharp and lengthy discussions. Slowly but surely, a targeted policy on Papiamento in community and education emerged. Government language institutes were established and language and education laws were passed. In 2007, it was determined that Curaçao now has 3 official languages, Papiamento, Dutch, and English. In 2008, the spelling of Papiamento, as the local language variant of Curaçao and Bonaire is called, was legally established, and the education law indicated the position of the different languages in education, including Papiamento. Papiamento bachelor's and master's programs were launched at the University of Curaçao. The University of Curaçao also established chairs and appointed professors who teach and conduct research on Papiamento. The next slide. Yes, it's not the aim to distinguish all you see, but just to give an impression. Because Papiamento was also legally a compulsory teaching language from 4 to 18 years old, educational materials had to be developed. The Language Institute, Fundación para Planificación de Idioma, has published modern textbooks for preschool, primary, and secondary schools in Papiamento. You can see also the different teams that worked on the books, and at the top you can see the different methods with a selection of the textbooks, the manuals, and the other materials they used daily in school nowadays. On the next slide, you can also see some covers of books. For teachers, students, researchers, and those interested in Papiamento, a relatively large amount of reference material has been published in recent decades, such as dictionaries, spelling books, a word bank, spell checkers, dissertations, and articles on Papiamento. To close, we can go to the next slide. I have tried to briefly present you with a success story, which you will know as well as I do, that we need to put things into perspective. It requires an enormous effort of working very hard to find the right people who are willing to put their weight behind it at all levels. Persistence usually pays off. The challenges do not disappear and continue to cross our path. A threat to the local languages is, for example, migration from the immense Latin American mainland from the Caribbean, and even from the European Netherlands. The large flow of tourists who want to be served in English, Spanish, and other languages creates language requirements from the hospitality sector. In general, globalization in education, commerce, economics, and technology does not make it easy for small languages, no matter how great their ambition is and how important the use of the home language remains for children and adults, citizens. While the challenges are many, we continue to work optimistically in our pursuit of protecting and expanding our language that remains under pressure. The current state of Papiamento is satisfactory, and worldwide it is known that Papiamento is one of the most developed Creole languages. For the future, the setting up of digital databases and the further development of digital language applications are necessary to accelerate language innovation. It is important for the protection of Papiamento that last week 4 Dutch ministers signed a governance agreement with the Commissioner of Bonaire, which is a municipality of Holland, to protect Papiamento on Bonaire. Appropriate status for Papiamento is also being studied at European level right now. These activities provide greater protection for this language and assure promotion at the levels of status, corpus, and distribution of Papiamento. I would like to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was amazing. And thank you, everyone, for staying with us and listening to us. I think some really interesting questions have been, and some really interesting issues have been brought up. Professor, I'm probably going to have to take you off the screen for the moment as I invite Nishaant to come with us. And while we are waiting for Nishaant to come, I know he's been having some internet challenges. I would also like to start prompting our audience to think about some of the things that were mentioned here, particularly, we know recognition of languages is one of the most important steps to safeguard it, but is it the only one? How do we do this? What is the role of education? And even the fact that many of these languages were created with displacement of people, forced displacement in a lot of times, and now they are being challenged by migration. So movement of people creates and challenges both sustaining the languages, but also led to their own creation, which I think is a very interesting point. Okay, I'm still waiting for Nishaant to join us. And thank you so much. I can see a couple of questions being brought up in the chat. We will look into them once we start having our discussion. I'll just give it a couple of more seconds. And if I see that Nishaant is still having some challenges in reconnecting, I will probably ask Kevin if he would like to present now, and then Nishaant will be the latest or the final speaker. So let me bring Kevin up, and Professor Ronald, I will see you very soon. Excuse me. Okay. So let me call Kevin. Nishaant, please take your time, and hopefully you'll be able to join us quite soon. I have also invited Kevin now, so we're just going to change a little bit the order that I was thinking of, but that's how technical and digital media works, right? We'll just have to improvise a little bit. So hello, Kevin.
Hello.
I am so sorry. I know
No
this is
problem.
not the order,
No problem.
but I want to give as much space for Nishaant to sort out his internet connection issues. And so we will probably go with you first. Would that be okay?
Sure, of course.
Okay, so let me introduce you first before you start. Welcome, Kevin Martens Wong serves as the founder and director of Kodrah Kristang, the national volunteer non-profit grassroots movement that revitalizes the critically endangered Portuguese Eurasian heritage language called Kristang. With this goal in mind, Kevin has independently developed the first ever structured Kristang curriculum and syllabi for adult learners alongside a 160-hour series of volunteer-run Kristang modules open to the public. It's the country's. He also helped put in place the country's first Kristang language festival, the first ever Kristang board game and online dictionary, and a 30-year revitalization plan for the language in Singapore. So Kevin graduated in English language from the National University of Singapore, receiving multiple awards. And he has prior teaching experience in 4 secondary schools. Kevin's work has been recognized by several international media outlets, as well as the Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and President Halimah Yacob. So Kevin is also a writer. His first novel, Altered Straits, was published in February 2017, and he is the first Singaporean to sit on the Kolang Advisory Circle, an international committee advising a biennial language institute dedicated to language documentation and revitalization around the world. So Kevin, as a writer, has also focused a lot on speculative fiction set in Singapore and the wider Southeast Asian region. And so I would like to welcome him. Kevin, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mariana. Hello, everybody. So yes, thank you for that very glowing introduction. I'm here to tell you about Kristang in Singapore. So you may recognize some similarities from with our 2 other speakers tonight. Oh, sorry, it's night for me in Singapore. I'm also going to give you a little background about the context in Singapore, which will be very different from Papiamentu, but yet you may notice some similarities as well. Okay, then I'll tell you a bit more about Kristang itself, its history, and then I will spend some time talking about our initiative as well as the sort of unique features of it, and then I'll round off with some observations about challenges facing our initiative in Singapore. Okay. So I'm from Singapore, and our island has also always been fairly multicultural and multilingual. You see all of the languages on the right side of the screen have some form of representation here. Either they are heritage communities or they're more recent additions to the island. Of course, Singapore institutionally doesn't recognize all of these. Only 4 of these are official languages. That's English, Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil. English is our common language, while the other 3 languages are the mother tongues of 3 of Singapore's major races. So these will be the Chinese, the Malays, and the Tamils. And starting from independence in 1965, our language policy mandated that the 4 official languages were the only languages of instruction to be used in schools. So that means you can only experience schooling in one of these 4 languages in Singapore.
So sorry, Kevin, we just have a comment that people are not seeing your presentation. Oliver, is that correct?
Okay.
I can see it. So
yeah,
yeah. Did you put
yes,
it in?
Yes. I think it's the same mistake that I made. So if you select it to only present the PowerPoint window, then it doesn't actually show it in full screen. It only shows you the window. So if you instead share your entire screen and then click present, it should work for you.
Would you like to? Super sorry to interrupt you, Kevin.
No problem. So what should I do?
So you share screen the same way, but this time instead of just sharing the window with the PowerPoint, you share your entire screen, and then you go to the PowerPoint and put it full screen. There.
Okay.
Does that
Cool,
make sense?
Cool. Got it. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Alrighty. So share. So like this. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, like this. Yes, and now just to the PowerPoint and.
Okay. Got it.
And now full screen.
Perfect.
Yeah, like this.
Perfect.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Sorry,
guys.
Kevin.
Sorry. No problem.
Go
I get it.
it.
Okay. Yeah. So Here, now you can see my pretty slides. English, Mandarin, and Malay and Tamil were the only languages of instruction that could be used in schools. Okay, by 1987, though, all Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil medium schools had closed due to falling enrollment. So English medium education is dominant in Singapore. Okay, so that means today most young people in Singapore speak some form of English, Mandarin as well as a home language, and most of us also speak Singlish, which is a Creole that rose in Singapore. There is a large body of sociolinguistic research that indicates the use of most of these other languages in Singapore is declining among younger generations of Singaporeans. Okay, so one of these languages is Kristang. Okay, and many Singaporeans who may have identified with Kristang many years ago may not do so today. Okay, so most young people like me who may be of Portuguese Eurasian descent, we may not identify with Kristang to the extent that maybe our parents or even our grandparents or great-grandparents did. Okay, so most of us tend to identify more with English and or Mandarin. Okay, so with that in mind, that's the context from which I operate in. I'm going to tell you a bit more about Kristang itself. Okay, so it's one of those languages that I had on the screen over there. Okay, of course, it's related to Papiamentu. Kristang is the endangered heritage language of the Portuguese Eurasians of Singapore and Malacca, and it is a Creole as well. Okay, so just like Papiamentu, and just like Papiamentu, Portuguese is the main lexifier of Kristang's vocab. We have strong grammatical influence in the language from Malay and hypothesized from Hokkien as well. Okay. Kristang also has a lot of vocabulary from Hokkien, Hakka, Cantonese, Dutch, English, Konkani, Malayalam, Hindi, and Indian varieties of Creole Portuguese, among others. Yeah, so it's got a lot of influences from all over the region. There are several communities of Kristang speakers still around. In Singapore, we don't really have statistics on the number of people who can still speak Kristang here. But our estimate is that there are about 100 or so speakers of the language left in Singapore. And of course, the definition of what counts as a fluent speaker is something, of course, that is up for negotiation as well, which makes it hard to count. But we keep that in mind when we talk to the media or when I do presentations like this as well. The bigger community is in Malacca. So Malacca is also the progenitor community of ours. I'll explain more about that in my later slides. We also have strong ties to Makista, so as Mariana has mentioned. There's also a large diaspora group of Eurasians from Malacca and Singapore in Perth. And I'll explain later about how that community came about. There are also Kristang speakers there. And research by other people doing research on the language suggests that there were people who spoke either Kristang or a related variety to Kristang in old Jakarta, known as Batavia, Dili, the capital of East Timor, and Ternate and Tidore in the Spice Islands in today's Indonesia. Yeah. So Kristang or varieties of Kristang were quite widely spoken throughout our region until about maybe the 18th or the 19th century when they started to decline. Yeah. Who exactly are these people who speak Kristang like me? We're Eurasian. So in our part of the world, Eurasian refers to people who are descended from mixed marriages between people from Europe and from Asia. Okay, so it's a broad category, and it's fairly fluid. But in Singapore, we tend to acknowledge three main historical subgroups of Eurasians, which stem from the three times that Malacca was conquered by Europeans. You have Portuguese Eurasians who stem from the Portuguese conquest of Malacca in 1511, Dutch Eurasians from the Dutch conquest of Malacca in 1641, and then the British takeover of Malacca from 1824 created a third main historical subgroup, the British Eurasians. These categories are not fixed either, because a lot of Eurasians have intermarried across these subgroups. And practically speaking, it can be quite difficult to determine whether you are Portuguese Eurasian, Dutch Eurasian, British Eurasian. Other other sub-identities of Eurasian. So you can have Scottish Eurasian, you can have Irish Eurasian, German Eurasian, so on. And of course, a mix of all of these is also possible. Okay, so it's a very fluid category. Little bit of backstory about how Kristang came about. So Kristang had its genesis in the 1511 conquest of Malacca. So you see the Portuguese were looking for spice, and they stopped. They were looking for a nice base to move forward into the Spice Islands, which are over here. And Malacca was a very strategically located city. So the Portuguese fought a pitched battle for the city with the Sultan at the time, Mahmud Shah. Mahmud Shah tried to use elephants to crush the Portuguese, but they weren't very effective, and the Portuguese were able to burn the city down and take control of it. Yeah, so forcing the Sultan to flee. And basically, the Portuguese were quite easily able to take control of Malacca and get a lot of resources out of that. Yeah. So that happened in 1511, and because this was the method that the Portuguese used to maintain control of their new conquests, they intermarried with the local Malay residents to create a mixed class, okay, known as casados. So this was to kind of perpetuate the Portuguese sphere of influence, and they were also joined by converts from other communities in the city. Now that the religion of the city became Catholicism, so these were probably the first speakers of Kristang, the children of these intermarriages between arriving Portuguese and local Malay residents. Yeah. And these will be the progenitors of the Eurasians, the Portuguese Eurasians that I mentioned earlier. For reasons of time, I can't go very much into detail about how Kristang survived in Malacca, although it's a fascinating topic and I'm happy to talk to you about it some other time. Between 1641 and 1824, Malacca was controlled by the Dutch, and that had quite interesting effects on the Kristang lexicon. So we do have quite a number of words from Dutch. And then in 1824, the British took possession of Malacca. Yeah. Our community in Singapore stems from around that period. So we were opened up for trade by the British in the early 1820s. Many Eurasians emigrated from Malacca to Singapore starting from that 1820s period. So for example, at least 3 of my great grandfathers emigrated from Malacca to Singapore around the 1830s to the 1850s. Yeah, and many Eurasian families in Singapore will have some sort of story just like that. Yeah. Okay, so the early Eurasian community in Singapore was centered around St. Joseph's Church, quite a historic church that's still standing today, as well as the school that this church founded called St. Anthony's Mission School in 1879. So if you've ever been to Singapore, you can still check out these places. Today, St. Anthony's Mission School is called the National Design Center. And this was the hub of Portuguese Eurasian activity in Singapore. In 1886, this Portuguese linguist dropped by Singapore and documented that community speaking Kristang. And this is the earliest mention of Kristang in Singapore that we found so far. We've also been able to supplement it with newspaper articles that mention Kristang as Patois Portuguese. So here in 1891, from 1891 to 1899, you see Kristang being used in sermons. So on the left, you see the Church of St. Joseph yesterday celebrated this feast. This priest celebrated the sermon in classical Portuguese, which the newspaper mentions as a language which we are requested to draw the attention of the good father is too difficult to be understood by the average Portuguese Eurasian of this place, who form the bulk of the congregation. On the right, this is 1 week later, so July 4th, July 11th, Father Baptista is preaching in Kristang instead, and the newspaper notes that this is quite much more intelligible to the people listening. Okay, so you can see that in Singapore, there was also this tension between Standard Portuguese and Kristang, but Kristang, of course, was far more intelligible to the local Eurasian community. Yeah. And the growth of this community, so if sermons are being delivered in the 1890s, you also have a thriving Kristang language theatre scene in Singapore, which has only been recently discovered. which lasted for more than 40 years between 1892 and 1926. A lot of plays from across different cultures. So here you have something from, you have the history of Camaralzaman, then you have an Italian drama, Leandro and Lizarda, and then you have Jacob and his 12 Sons, and then of course, The Merchant of Venice. All of these are performed in Kristang. The sad thing is that we have not been able to find any of the scripts of these plays. Literally, these newspaper articles are all that remains of these actual plays. If anybody is holding on to the scripts, please please let me know. That would be great. But we're still looking for them. Yeah, but the community was quite sizable, and there was quite strong interest in the theatre scene, at least. After independence in 1965, the decline of Kristang was unfortunately cemented because Singapore's new language policies came into force. So the official language thing that I mentioned at the start. A lot of people were moved around as well, so that broke up a lot of speech communities, including Kristang. Okay, and by Christmas Day 1988, Kristang gets mentioned in the Straits Times, which is our main newspaper, but it's described as going the way of Latin. Okay, although you see, Malaccan Portuguese food has survived the test of time, at least. In 1989, we also introduced the ethnic integration policy. So Singapore is quite a big believer in public housing, but alongside public housing came racial quotas for that public housing, which dispersed the Kristang-speaking community throughout Singapore and exacerbated Kristang's decline further. So in Singapore today, there are no like geographically proximate groups of Kristang speakers. Unlike in Malacca, if you've been to Malacca, you may know that Malacca has this place called the Portuguese settlement, where lots of people can speak Kristang together. In Singapore, we don't actually have that because of the ethnic integration policy and resettlement. So today, there's little general awareness of Kristang in Singapore. The language is not taught in schools. There's almost no media publications in Kristang other than this 2004 dictionary on screen, which was reprinted in 2017. So what do we do in that context? So I initiated this revitalization initiative in March 2016 called Kodrah Kristang. So we've tried to initiate a bunch of smaller projects underneath that. I think the one that we run most consistently is these adult classes. So as Mariana mentioned in my bio, we developed a curriculum for the language, which runs across 8 modules of 10 sessions each. And this is kind of the center of what we do, because it helps to create that speech community that embraces Kristang as that identity. So here's a picture of what that looked like in 2016. This is the second time we ran that class. And in the particular context of Singapore, because of how Singapore works as a society and all that, we try and keep those classes open to adults from all races, ages, and backgrounds. We don't restrict it based on whether the person is Eurasian or not. Because in Singapore, that context is has been quite established for some time. Language learning beyond your own community is actually quite accepted. So, for example, a lot of Eurasians in Singapore schools, we can't do Kristang in school. So we usually take Malay or Mandarin. Some of us take Tamil. And that kind of cross-cultural linguistic learning is totally fine. So in the same way, our initiative is open to everyone. And approximately 2/3 of our learners are of Eurasian descent, while the rest have no ties to the community. And that kind of extends into our core team as well. So our core team involves quite a few Eurasians, but it also involves people from outside the community. And that interaction is quite important for us because we want Kristang to be a part of Singapore and to respond to how Singapore is as a society as well. And our older speakers, our heritage speakers, are actually very, very open to that. There is this sense of fulfillment and respect when people from outside the community are interested in Kristang, because then it's like, wow, we are valued, people care about us and are interested in our heritage. And that's something that we try and focus on when we do our lessons. Class is free, we try and keep it free as far as possible, or very, very low cost. We produce all our materials ourselves, and we also try and keep our materials freely available online. Yeah. This was also to reduce barriers to entry. We wanted as many people as possible to be able to learn the language. Also because I'm not a native speaker of Kristang, I picked up the language while I was in university doing fieldwork, and I don't feel like I should be charging for classes, just because I don't command that native speaker identity. Yeah. So some of two very unique things about Kristang very quickly. We try and respect Kristang's polynomic status. So early on, when we started working with some of the older speakers, we realized that the language, different families have developed their own idiolects or varieties of Kristang. And in some cases, this means that they differ when it comes to deciding what counts as grammatical, what counts as a Kristang word or Kristang phrase. Pronunciation sometimes differs quite significantly between families. For example, the word for dollar in Kristang, some families say it's petaka with emphasis on the second syllable, and some families say it's pataka with emphasis on the first syllable. Yeah. So because again, the core team, we are not native speakers of Kristang. We don't feel like we have the authority to go and impose on people who have spoken the language from when they were growing up. And we try and therefore in class recognize this richness of Kristang, these different varieties that still exist to date. Okay, so for example, when we teach this word kere, right, to want, here are all the ways that we've seen kere spelled by our heritage speakers. And we try and teach as many of them as possible in class. Of course, we do focus on one or two spellings so that our learners can, so that, slides aren't overwhelmed with 14 different spellings on every slide. But we also encourage learners to spell in the way that makes sense to them. And if they come from a family which is speaking Kristang already, or they remember it from childhood, and maybe they have a pronunciation that we haven't encountered yet, we strongly encourage people to tell us about it and to talk about it in class so that we can still acknowledge that variation. The other thing that we do in Singapore for Kristang is that many younger Eurasians report that, hey, I want to learn this language, but I don't see how it's relevant to me. I can't use it to talk about things that I'm interested in. And early on, there was this list of stuff that people wanted to talk about in Kristang, but they didn't really have a word for it. They either had to use English or they used Malay. But many younger Eurasians were like, oh, I wish we had a Kristangish word for this. So we set up a working group called the Jardingu, which is a safe space for the accelerated development of new Kristang words. Again, we're not an authority. This is just a working group to suggest new words. And this group, unfortunately, we don't run it anymore because of COVID. But the form over there is still active if you want to take a look at how it works. tinyurl.com/klaifala. We used to take these suggestions and we used to discuss them in a WhatsApp chat. And then suggestions that everybody voted on. It was a democratic process. We then suggested in class to see if people liked these suggestions. And if they didn't, we would revise it and we go back to the drawing board. And that kind of ability to look at the language and understand it in a deeper way for many people, because often we wanted to respect the language as well and to understand how exactly did Kristang get certain words, right? Why do certain words come from Dutch? What domains of life did Kristang borrow from Dutch, from Malay, and so on? And that process of understanding the language a little more deeply was actually something that was very meaningful for a lot of people, both our older speakers and for the younger Eurasians who were interested in learning the language. So this is something that we do in Singapore. Again, we're not an authority. We just want to sort of generate that discussion, to provide a catalyst for that discussion to take place so that people identify more of Kristang as well. As Mariana mentioned, we've had a lot of success with the state. The state is very supportive of what we do, especially because it's a ground-up initiative, which is something that the government has been trying to encourage recently. And we were able to run this Kristang Language Festival. We've received some grants, small grants, to help us with materials and stuff and venue hosting. And basically, it's actually been something that has been very positive. We've really enjoyed working closely with not just the government, but with other communities who, because of our publicity and stuff, have also started to try and do language revitalization to some degree. So slowly, the space is slowly opening up. Unfortunately, because of COVID, again, a lot of things got derailed. But we're hoping that as things return to normal, we will again be able to kickstart some of those things. Yes. So, Mutu Grandi Merce, thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions later. Okay, thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Kevin. If everyone allows me a little bit of personal gratitude, eu bem de feliz ouvi falar vos.
Hey.
So thank you. I mean, for those who don't know, my language descends from the Kristang of Malacca, so we are like the grandchildren. So thank you so much. And I think, again, this was a great example that touched upon slightly different topics than we've heard in the previous presentation, including how to create new words and new contexts. So we're going to pick up on this a little bit in our discussion. Thank you. I'm going now to call upon Nishaant. So let me invite him on screen. And thank you, Kevin. I will bring you up again as soon as we start our discussion. So this is a little bit of technical. Thank you. Let me just go into a bit of some technical details here. And thank you so much, everyone. Please stay with us a bit longer. We are very much looking forward to hearing Nishaant, and we want to hear you in the discussion as well. Please feel free to post your questions. I've already seen comments on the chat. Hello, Nishaant. How are you doing?
How are you?
I hope everything will be fine. So we're going to ask Oliver to share your presentation, most probably. Would that be okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so Oliver is going to help us. And so let me first read your bio, Nishaant. And once again, thank you so much for joining us. So Nishaant Choksi is currently an assistant professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Gandhinagar in Gujarat, India. Again, I'm terribly sorry if I mispronounced something. So Nishaant has been engaged with work on Adiwasi languages and cultures of India for almost 2 decades. He has published several works related with India's indigenous people, such as Tribal Literature of Gujarat, a multilingual publication which documents the emerging written traditions of the Bhil Adiwasis in Gujarat, a course in Mundari, which is a learning manual for the Mundari language of Eastern India, and most recently an academic monograph entitled Graphic Politics, analyzing the emergence and popularity of indigenous language scripts in Eastern India. Nishaant, welcome, and the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we could just go to the next slide. I appreciate, first of all, just want to thank Mariana and Nishaant, who's one of the organizers here, who has worked, we've worked together in Gujarat, so thank you very much. And yeah, I just want to give a quick overview. I don't want to go into a lot of specific, just a quick overview about the situation of Adiwasi languages, the relationship to colonialism and safeguarding. I think maybe there seems to be many South Asian people in the audience, so they might be able to say things about this. So first of all, just colonialism in the South Asian context, particularly how it relates to language. So, you know, as we all know, I mean, I think most of us here know that India or British or South Asia was, you know, a colony of the British, and there was a different kind of linguistic policies put into place. English, of course, was the privileged language of the administration, the colonial and native elite, the language of law, and it still is in many ways in the post-colonial state. But then also along with English, there was also another policy of the British that privileged the literary varieties of different regions, right? So you have in the East, the Bengal presidency, of course, Bengali, you have Marathi, you have Hindustani, which was Urdu, Persian in the central areas. In the South, you have Tamil, Telugu. These are the literary varieties usually spoken by the upper caste elites. That particular variety of the language, which was privileged as the vernacular language of those regions and the language of the regional governance. So the next slide. So in this way, what colonialism did in many ways was India already had a caste system in place before colonialism. There was already, great inequalities among people, and that had linguistic implications. So colonialism in a lot of ways reinforced that and extended that caste system and the linguistic sort of basis as a mode of governance, as a mode of linguistic governance in the society. So before, language wasn't necessarily a highly multilingual country, you all know, India or South Asian region. So a mode of linguistic governance over the whole region, right? And so the post-colonial state sort of eventually just adopted this. So in the Constitution of India, which is in many ways a very, very interesting document, trying to somehow bring in notions of equality and notions of trying to manage this diversity. They created an 8th schedule, which had the official languages of India, and now that schedule has been expanded to 22. And then later on, early on in the after the independence of the country, the government decided to reorganize the states, right, along the lines of language, because there were a lot of problems with the imposition of certain languages. For instance, Hindi, which was supposed to be the national language, was supposed to be was rejected by people in the southern regions, and in general, the regional elites during the colonial times had operated with regional language as a governance. So states were then reorganized around linguistic lines. So for instance, I'm in Gujarat right now, so the language of the regional language of governance is Gujarati. If I go down to Maharashtra, which is in the southern part of India, it's Marathi. And so the whole region of Gujarat, the whole region of Maharashtra is Gujarati, Marathi. If I go to the west, Madhya Pradesh, it would be Hindi. Okay, so this linguistic governance was extended across the states. All right, next slide. So this was, could you go to the next slide? So this was, this linguistic states was thought to be something that would kind of empower people, but many people thought that it was actually something disempowering, because as B.R. Ambedkar, who was the chairperson of the drafting committee of the Constitution of India, and a famous intellectual of Dalit background, which is one of the marginalized caste community. He wrote that the evil consequences of the caste system are sure to be sharpened by the creation of the linguistic states. Linguistic states has its basis in caste, and minority communities may be crushed. If not crushed, they may be tyrannized and oppressed. They are sure to be discriminated against and denied equality before law and equal opportunity in public life. In fact, the formation of linguistic states, which was an attempt to manage the diversity of the country, actually extended colonialism and into the new framework of the Indian post-colonial state. This is what Ambedkar's argument was in 1955, which is less than 10 years after independence of India. Okay, next slide. So what are the languages that are the ones most affected by the creation of the linguistic states? These are the indigenous languages, or in India, it's called tribal languages, the indigenous languages, of which there's a huge number of them. Most of them are not official. So about 780 spoken languages in India, according to the survey recently done by scholar Ganesh Devi, who I worked with, and also Nishaant on the organizing committee here has worked with. And 400 out of the 780, according to this survey, although I think it's much more than that, are endangered, and they're the tribal languages. And these tribal languages are mostly spoken across the state lines. That's why they're not given any official status, right? Either they're dispersed in different pockets, and they're dispersed over wide regions, in the forests, in the hills, across the borders of states, so that people from some part of the community may be having to learn, get education in a certain language, like for instance, Bengali, and then on one side, and then you cross over a few kilometers and they're getting their education in Hindi. And both ways, their language, the language of their community, is not recognized, right? So the dispersal of these minority indigenous languages, small scale, living in the villages, living in these regions away from the urban centers, this was affected by the creation of the linguistic states. Okay, next slide. So I'll talk about my two field experiences here, and I'm still engaged in these field sites and with these communities, and so maybe we could just discuss them. And there's some relevance also to the previous discussions. So my first field work, in 2004, since 2004, I've been working in the Gujarat Adiwasi areas. And so these areas are, sorry, I meant to put a map here, but it didn't get put on. It was, these are on the borders of linguistic states of the western part. So there's Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Maharashtra. All throughout their area is the Bhil community lives, which is one of the largest indigenous communities. So I worked in this area, Tejgarh, where there is a large language center there that is focusing on the documentation of indigenous languages of India. Next slide. So in this area, what I found was, so these languages were not written down. There was a very rich oral tradition. For instance, you may have heard of the Indian epic Mahabharata or Ramayana. So they had an oral tradition in their languages of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, right? And so there was a very rich oral tradition, but there wasn't much written tradition, and there wasn't much schooling or education for a long time. But once education came in there, once schooling came in there, people, there was a situation where people started switching to Gujarati, which is the regional language. And so, once they moved to the urban centers, many of the indigenous people, the Adiwasis, felt very ashamed to speak tribal languages, because tribal language was the sign of the lower caste, marginalized caste, backward. These were the stigma. This was a stigma attached to it. So especially in the urban settings. In the rural settings, a little bit different, but education and the pressure to accommodate to the sort of upper caste morality was there. Next slide. So as part of this Bhasha Center, people started trying to write down these languages, and they started various magazines, of which I helped with also. Like they tried to do magazines, so they had like maybe 10 or 15 different magazines just for one region, in all the different languages, and they used the Gujarati script for that. And so there was a corpus of literature collected, and this is the basis of the book I edited, Tribal Literature of Gujarat, where we used the tribal languages, Gujarati and English, to try to translate and make these available for a wider audience. Next slide. So I'll talk about the effect of that in the end. In my second field work, we did in the eastern part of India. It's in the area called West Bengal and Jharkhand. So with the Santali language, it's another indigenous language, and it's spread over many, many states of India. So Assam in the northeast, Bihar, Jharkhand, Orissa, West Bengal, even into Nepal and Bangladesh. It's an Austroasiatic language, Kherwalian, it's called, Austroasiatic. That means it's related actually to Vietnamese or Khmer in Cambodia, to different languages, Mon, so this kind of thing. Next slide. So this had a little bit different trajectory than the Bil languages, where it was just started to be written down. Here, in the early 20th century, a member of the community developed their own script for the language. This is called the Old Chiki script. And with that script, they started a parallel education system. That's grassroots education in the villages. Now, keep in mind, still most of the people were not literate at the time. But those people who were starting to go to school, starting to learn in the other languages, in this case, it was Bengali, Uriya, and Hindi. They were also being affected by this parallel movement in their villages. So there was two movements going on at the same time. One for literacy, mainstream, one for parallel literacy. And this script, even though people couldn't read this script necessarily, it created a visible attraction towards learning the language. And many educated Santals who were moving away from the language due to their jobs, due to being relocated, due to education, were now attracted because of the script. So this was a big movement there. Next slide. So in addition, the other thing about revitalization of language, especially if you look in the South Asian context, is politics, right? Language is always political. Like the formation of the linguistic states was political. I mean, in fact, because somebody had fasted until death in southern India, Andhra Pradesh, that they made even linguistic states, so it's always a political thing. And so this language, this indigenous language, was also tied with a political movement for an independent Adiwasi majority state, which was called Jharkhand. Okay, and there was a lot of people fighting for this state, and languages. It created the interest among the communities in Eastern India to showcase their languages as the future possible languages of these states. And so part of it, how they did that, was also the education system, higher education system. There wasn't primary schooling in this language, but what they started was a famous Adiwasi intellectual who was educated in Chicago University, came back and started a department of Adiwasi languages, the first ever in India, in Eastern India, in a city called Ranchi. And this created some legitimacy for the language, right? And script could play a role, and an elite could be created who were speaking the language or writing in the language, which is very important, right? Considering, people, who do people look up to when they're going for education? So Jharkhand was made in 2001, although Adiwasi languages were not made official there. Santali was made an official language in 2003, yet it's not the official language of any state, even now. Next slide. So if I would just talk about the difference in the safeguarding strategies, it's not that Santali was more useful than the Bili language. Santali spoken in the East and the Bili language spoken in the West. It's not like they have different use values necessarily at any given point in time until maybe now. But in both were considered by the upper castes or the elite people as backward, or and there was also a time when many educated people in the East were shifting to the dominant languages. Like many people are shifting to Bengali in my fieldwork. And I saw even now people were shifting, but less. Because there was more awareness of preserving Santali, because Santali language, due to the script, became part of a popular culture. Popular culture. There were plays about the script. There were songs about the language. There was lots of other things, going on there. Magazines were being written by the people, not by an NGO. Okay. So next slide. So Santali, which was spoken in the East, has a strong history of literature and publication, right? Bili does not. So that created a basis for when it was instituted in education. Santali language was tied to a movement for the Jharkhand state, right? There's a political dimension to the language. The movement for script moved the younger generation to embrace Santali, right? Even though they were losing it, they embraced it again. It created a pressure on the community to embrace it again once elites from the community were joining in. Again, higher education is very important, right? Because this is a stratified system. And there was grassroots education in the language by the community members, right? Parallel education systems were created as models to then institute in the schools and in the colleges, not directly, because then it gets bogged down in the bureaucratic government, things and the upper caste mode of governance, which is anti-tribal languages. Next slide. So I don't see that much scope in Gujarat, where I am currently. There's a start to promote these languages, and there's different kind of political organizations here, like Adiwasi Ekta Parishad, there's Adiwasi Sahitya Sabha. So but very sort of, just smaller in scale organizations. And they're not using Bili to talk to each other. They're using Hindi, Gujarati, Marathi. That's one of the problems. The language of political communication is not the Adiwasi languages, right? So this is one of the problems, because these languages are also, there's a lot of different variety and there's a lot of differences, subdivisions within these communities. And there's new political movements also among these groups now. So we have this Bharatiya Tribal Party, a lot of different political parties coming up, and they might promote this language, although language is not on their agenda right now. But we're yet to see that. Okay, next slide. So right now, many people think that it's primary education is the main thing. But from the case that I worked in, I also said that higher education might be more important than primary education. Higher education, like in starting in university, starting with creation of a class of people from the community who then can go back to the schools and make policy. Otherwise, you're having people not from the community or people who don't know making policy. Literature and social media should be made available. I think, in the previous lecture, they talked about this. The interest of the non-Adivasis to learn the Adiwasi languages, right? Will raise greater awareness among people in the Adiwasi communities, right? Of the value of their language. This is another thing, right? This is a way in these systems where people are trying to get mobile and try to move up in different spaces. If they see that in the spaces they're trying to go, like the urban spaces or the educational spaces, their language is there, then that will be something that will help in promoting it. Next slide. Just final. So again, there should be less focus on what is right and wrong in language in general. The languages are very diverse, and there's always a tendency of standardization to show what's right and wrong, and then this creates a lot of problems. Magazines, journals, poetry sessions, comedy, plays, movies, these are all coming up now in the Adiwasi languages, right? And they're very important. They helped a lot, especially in both East and West. So sometimes you're bypassing text now completely. And people are just interested in music now, making music or making plays, movies, performance. It's fine. That's another way. And the making of textbooks is not a good thing unless there's enough indigenous literature already created, right? So indigenous literature should be created first and then textbooks. Otherwise, textbooks will have a tendency just to translate from the dominant languages into the indigenous languages. And this actually, I think, harms the indigenous languages. And I saw in the case of Santali, a lot of it was taken from even though Santali has a literature, the policymakers didn't really listen to it, and they translated famous Bengali writers into Santali and they put it in the textbook. So this is always a tendency of people to do this. unless the textbook process can be sort of, you know, reorganized or whatever. Yeah. So next slide. Thank you very much. Johar. This is the old Chiki script here. Johar in Santali. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Oliver, as well. Please stay with us, Nishaant. We are going into the discussion, and thank you, everyone, for staying with us. I'm just going to do some technical kind of maneuvers here. So I see Oliver has already left us. I am going to call in Professor Ronald again, and Kevin. So here it is. Yes. Okay, so please still feel free. I am going to touch upon the questions and comments that people are now posting in the chat and in the question box. And I'm just waiting for Kevin to join us. Let's see if he's still there. Yeah, he is joining us in a little bit. Cool, yeah, so don't worry as well for those who have arrived late. This will be available as a YouTube video, and it will be shared. Of course, we would love if you would still reconnect with us afterwards, and if you want to speak with any of us, please send us an email or contact us in any way. So once again, thank you so much. Of course, I also encourage our three speakers to ask questions to each other if you do have those questions. So what I found, let's just reconnect again to the main purpose of our panel, which is, how do we deal with languages that have resulted out of and or have been profoundly affected by colonialism. And we have touched upon really important points, language recognition, creating new contexts and new vocabulary, issues of power and political forces, and shifting the ways we even think about these languages. We have also seen various steps to improve recognition of these languages, and we've touched upon a lot on the concept of education and creating educational tools at different levels in different ways. We have to be very much aware that many of these languages have been created from the displacement, and like I said, quite dramatic displacement of people who were brought in from different places together, and sometimes unwillingly, and placed in the same space. And then we have the case of languages that were made completely invisible, forced to change, and even eradicated with the arrival of new people and new powers. So we're having here quite different situations. And I guess that perhaps the first question, and I think this is very biased, of course, but how do we even decide if we want to safeguard these languages? Who decides what is an endangered language? We've spoken about this issue of how do we even recognize the amount of speakers. So would you like to think a little bit about who gets to decide whether we safeguard these languages or not? Have you faced that aspect in your research and your studies? Have you confronted yourselves with this question before? And please feel free to answer in any order.
I think for wait, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's a very difficult question in all our contexts because again, when we deal with languages like the ones that we're working with, identity and questions of how fluent somebody is in those languages can be contested, especially as I think we've all acknowledged tonight. Sorry, I keep saying tonight. As we've all acknowledged here, it's sometimes even a very question of, do these things count as languages in the first place, right? And for many people who may actually speak these varieties fluently, they may not even see themselves as speaking these varieties fluently. So that process of who gets to speak for these languages and all that is constantly being negotiated, I feel. In Singapore, I guess it really is a privilege to be able to represent the community in this way. Again, because I'm not a native speaker. And I think it really also varies from community to community. As I mentioned, in the specific context that we operate in, there is that understanding that you don't necessarily need to be somebody from the community or somebody who is a native speaker of the language to be able to teach the language, right? Yeah, but again, I am very interested to hear how that context, how that is negotiated elsewhere as well. Yeah.
After I've heard Kevin and Nishaant, I think, and the feeling is that the case of Papiamento is less simpler. So it's very big, large countries and a lot of languages. So it is very limited in our context. So we only have 3 islands where we speak Papiamento. You can hear from which island you're coming. So in Bonaire and Curaçao, we call the language Papiamento, and in Aruba it's called Papiamento. I used Papiamento because that's the English way to say it, but we rather talk about Papiamento. So it was a very natural process. Not that we didn't encounter challenges. There were challenges. There were moments in history. Let's say around 1915, you got a large refinery from Shell, and they spoke Dutch. While in Aruba, they also got refineries where they spoke, and were American refineries. So there was a whole city or a whole village where the people working in the refinery worked, so they tended to speak English. So in Curaçao, there was a moment that a lot of constructors came from Holland who spoke Dutch. They built villages for the Dutch workers from the Shell. So there were influences in such a small community. So then the tendency was to use only Dutch in schools. So it was policy to use Dutch in school. But in the 60s and in the 70s, it turned around, because when we got the autonomy, or we were more autonomous in the kingdom, and we had self-government, so we have our own government. At first, it was Dutch which was allowed to speak in parliament. But in 58, there was a small revolution during a meeting, and they stopped the meeting and chose for Papiamento, and Papiamento was from then on allowed. And now nobody thinks of speaking Dutch in any meeting, and certainly not an official meeting. So things had a natural way to come like this, and now it was just to say, how do we cope with it, and how do we, after we made the decisions to have Papiamento as an official language, how do we take care of it in school? And that's where it not started. It's a long process, but the discussion isn't there anymore as it was as sharp in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah. Yes, no, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm aware that there's also some questions for Professor Nishaant, but he's having a little bit of some technical issues. So I am going to share some of the questions that were raised by the audience regarding Kevin and Professor Ronald's presentation. Okay, so let me go through some of the comments, and I can see that one of the questions that was first raised was by Subir Rana, and Subir asked several things related with Papiamento, and since we're already speaking about Papiamento, I'll make that connection. So there were at least 2 questions, or 3 questions actually, almost similar, 2 questions, let's say, raised about this. So the first would be, how is Papiamento placed with respect to the main language in the ABC Islands? And have there been challenges by other minor languages and cultures, and why have there been challenges? And of course, have there been efforts to encourage papiamento by, again, the local ABC island governments, and which efforts have they been? Professor Ronald?
Yeah. The first question, how is papiamento placed with respect to the main language in the ABC? We don't speak about the main language anymore since we have 3 official languages. So we know that Dutch was the main language and still is in some domains, like the administration, the paperwork, it's all in Dutch. But they try to translate a lot of documents in papiamento when it's possible. Forms and things you need in daily life, they're all in papiamento. In the streets, you won't hear any Dutch anymore. In school, it's still Dutch in some schools. Parents may choose which schools their children can visit. There are 3 possibilities. There's a papiamento only school. There's only one in Curaçao. There are like 4 Dutch only schools, and the rest of the schools in Curaçao are bilingual, papiamento Dutch. But at the end of the 6th grade, all children compulsory has to take exams in papiamento and Dutch. So the subject of maths is offered in Dutch and papiamento. So the pupils can choose which one they want to pass. So there are different things that are fixed right now. Not everything is in place yet, and we also have the 2 other islands like Bonaire, which in 2010 became a municipality of Holland. So they fall directly under the inspection of The Hague in Holland. But papiamento is still possible. In Aruba, they have papiamento as a subject matter, but it is not yet, in general, the language of instruction of the school. So it's different in the 3 countries, on the 3 islands, but there's a common thing, that is that papiamento is the language that is spoken daily. That's one of the questions. And if there are challenges by other minor languages, no, there are not any other minor languages on the island. On the islands there are, but they're mostly languages of migrant groups, like from the Haitian group, Creole. We have maybe English groups from Jamaica speaking patois. So in that way, there are minor, and let's say the Spanish-speaking group is a minor group. It's becoming larger every day because of the things going on in Venezuela. It's a very large country, so we have illegal migrants coming to Curaçao to get a legal status. I think those were the 2 questions. Papiamento.
Yes,
maybe I can give the other ones also a chance to.
Yes, I will. I actually do have questions for both Kevin and Nishaant, and I will go with Nishaant first because I know his internet connection is a little bit unstable. I'm sorry, Nishaant, I'm putting you in the spot. There were a couple of questions for you, and I'm just going to combine them. The first one would be, can you specify the nature of the field work you did and the sort of exercises that were incorporated in that? And there was another question related with, could you please help us, oh, wait, not this one, sorry. Where is it? Oh, it's here. Could you please share your insight on modern day colonialism going in India through Safarinization and nationalizing Hindi as dominant language in the current scenario? So that would be the 2 questions.
Okay, yeah, sure. So the fieldwork, I'm a linguistic, and my training is linguistic anthropology. So I went into the communities, I stayed in the rural areas for a long term, for 18 months in each place. and did various kinds of participant observation. I went to
sorry, everyone. Let's just give a couple of seconds to see if the internet can come back. I wonder if switching off the video will help. Nope. No, he's still reconnecting. Yes, I will just wait 2 or 3 more seconds. No, and I will go into Kevin then. Yeah, but I mean, hopefully, the questions have been asked, and hopefully we can go back to the answers that Nishaant was giving. In the meantime, I will try and bring him back. But there, I had also a question, and there was another question on the chat that I'm going to take advantage of and do that. But I'm wondering regarding the creation of new vocabulary, right? That I think in Kristang is such a big thing. Do you think this is an important step in safeguarding languages? And how actually does it work, this process of inviting the students, inviting the community to be a part of the formation of this language with no authoritarian voice actually dictating what can be said? I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about that process.
Sure, yeah.
And I know there is a question that then will be raised to all of you at the end, and I'm going to keep that and wait for Nishaant to come back, okay? So, Kevin.
So yes, thank you for the question. It's one we get a lot. I think the principle that we start with is that the language doesn't belong to us, as in like we don't have any exclusive ownership over it. And that principle of acknowledging that variation is very important for us. It goes kind of hand in hand with avoiding selecting a standard form for the language as well, because we feel that this would disprivilege many speakers and their own understandings of the language, right? Which have evolved separately over the years, that you have different families speaking the language in smaller groups rather than as one community. So how we kind of do it is everybody who's in the 3rd level and above of our classes is automatically part of Jardingu unless they opt out. And students in the first 2 levels can opt in. And of course, people who already speak the language and who are not part of the community of Kodrah Kristang but want to participate in this, we're also very welcome to having them on board. We've actually had 3 or 4 people like that. Everybody can suggest concepts through that online form. And then each week, the core team, 1 or 2 of us will select concepts for discussion based on what has come up through that form, as well as in class, right? So as we're teaching, sometimes people will be like, hey, how do you say washing machine? Then we're like, oh, we don't know. Yeah. And we do a lot of checking first to see if any families actually use the word and stuff. And then we try and do discussions based on semantic domain. So there's a thematic relation between what's being discussed. So we will add all those suggestions in the WhatsApp chat, and then we try and bookend it with the weekend. So we put the suggestions at the start of the weekend, the first weekend. Then we all discuss what's in the WhatsApp chat throughout the week, and then at the end of the week, we vote on what we prefer, which suggestions we prefer. We can also veto concepts or suggestions. Generally, the word with the most number of votes, we add it as a suggested word. But if the vote is a tie, it's very close, or too many people do not participate, we don't take the word in. And then when we use the words in our classes, we mark them with a pointy arrow. So it's the arrow above the number 6 on a conventional keyboard. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. So when we signal that in class, it's to make sure that people understand that this is a new word, that we're just recommending it. But it's by no means like a final stamp of approval, and we can totally like change that later if people are not comfortable with it. And of course, we also say that it's a new word, you don't have to use it. You can use a Portuguese word, you can use an English word, you can use Malay. Any of that's fine with us. Yeah.
Has that also been taking place in Papiamento?
Yes, but in Papiamento, because it's very official. We have exams, we have textbooks in Papiamento.
Yeah.
Everything should be fixed.
Yeah.
So we had official word lists. We had commissions. In the 60s, we had a commission, Comisión de Standardización de Papiamento, officialized by the minister, with 3 islands involved. Afterwards, when we had the institution, the Fundación para Planificación de Idioma, they had their own commission, and there was a moment that the minister wanted a list of words and to state the rules of orthography of Papiamento. So we did. Yes. So that's also official. We can change it. And adding new words, we have our largest lexifier is Spanish. So it's not so difficult, because the way, the morphosyntax, the way you form words, let's say from a verb making a noun, you use the Spanish way. So let's say comer, comimento, in Papiamento is also comimento in Papiamento, same as in Spanish. We also have, for some words, let's say in banking, we use English words. We don't use the word check anymore. You can write a check. That was a word used in Papiamento for a long time. And for computer science or using the computer, in the computer shop, they will use, because it's written on the boxes, they will say, this is a screen and there's a keyboard. But sometimes we choose for the Spanish way. So we don't say screen, but pantalla is the official word. But for the keyboard, we use keyboard because teclado is a little further away from Papiamento. So those are the choices. But we try to stay in, let's say, for English, for the technical things sometimes, and mostly we use Spanish words.
Yes. Nishaant, oh, hello. Sorry, you were left in the middle of your explanation. Would you like me to repeat the questions again? Or would you like to... Okay, just give it a couple of seconds. Yeah, sorry, everyone. This is part of our daily lives now. I wonder if... oh, no, it was gone. Okay, I'll see if I can bring him back. In the meantime, then I will raise the more broader question that I know was written here in the chat. And that broader question is, and I acknowledge that there are other questions for Nishaant in the chat, so I hope I can still raise those to him, especially one that's right at the top. But I'm going now to raise this question. As colonies, were there tensions between local governments and the metropole regarding managing your languages? So have attitudes in the so-called metropole, so we're talking about, for example, the Netherlands or the UK, have they changed significantly since your nations have gained more independence? So what have been the tensions?
So now for Papiamento, I think in my presentation, when I read the letter, not a letter, but a passage in the book of Mr. Paddenberg, it was clearly that they didn't appreciate Papiamento very much in the 18th century. This was a book of a teacher himself, not of the government, but I think it was the way they look at the Creole language, but it changed over centuries. And now, as I told at the end, a document was signed with ministers, with the deputy in Bonaire, and the document is written officially in 2 languages, in 2 columns, and one in Dutch and one in Papiamento. That's already, that says something about the approach nowadays. And if you look at the website of Holland, of the kingdom, everything is translated every 3 pages, Dutch, English for the SSS Islands and Papiamento for the ABC Islands. So they live the way they say it. So if we are equal partners in the kingdom, they are treating us just like that right now. It's becoming more what it should be, but I think we reached a phase where there's satisfaction in the part of the colony. We're not a colony. We don't call. We're part of the kingdom, but some locally there's discussion most of the time about we are colony, so we want to be totally independent. Our movements, but generally that's not the big question.
Okay. So Nishaant, I just asked the last question that is on the chat, but I do want you to go back to the questions I had asked you. One was about fieldwork, and I saw you've answered that. Also, the other one was about the colonialism going in India, right, through Safarinization and nationalizing Hindi. There is another question that was asked, which is, what other alternative models of language planning and policy would have been effective in the post-colonial Indian context? And I think I lost Nishaant again. I will just read the question out loud so that it can be in the recording. So the question is, what other alternative models of language planning and policy would have been effective in the post-colonial Indian context to ensure a more inclusive model for Adiwasi and minorities? So I hope if Nishaant isn't able to answer this question live, that he will be able to go back to the audience that's with us or who will listen to us and provide some sort of written comment on that. So Kevin, would you like to now go into the question that I asked? That's a more broader general question following up. Yeah.
So yeah, I think the metropole thing is quite an interesting take on it also, and I appreciated Prof's response as well. It's quite different also, I think. In the UK, in Singapore, I think for Eurasians, the British middle class identity was something that a lot of people aspired to. So many Eurasians in Singapore really wanted to take on that British class middle identity because it provided jobs, it provided access to education, and of course there was that social aspect as well, right? So you were seen as the more you could embody that particular identity, the more you would gain access to all of these nice things and because of that, there was preference for English over Kristang. So whether it was in school, whether it was in sort of religious settings also, right? So a lot of Eurasians entered the Church of St. Joseph, but you also had Eurasians going to the English-speaking masses at the Cathedral of the Good Shepherd, and that was seen as more Britishy. And this constant tension was there until World War II. After World War II, because of how the Japanese kind of forced a lot of Eurasians to kind of consolidate the identity into kind of a more supra community identity. English then became even more strongly associated with Eurasians, and Kristang kind of dropped out even more because post-independence there wasn't that kind of investment in the language. So Kristang's always been at a disadvantage compared to English in that way, and again, I don't think a lot of it was official policy in colonial Singapore. A lot of it was more social norms and things like that. Then, of course, after the UK withdrew, finally in 1972, a lot of the independence language policies were the ones that kind of enshrined English, the preeminence of English, and Kristang, of course, didn't get that kind of institutional status. I thought that the tension between the sort of colonizer power and the colony has always been quite an interesting one for us because then it's like, what are we? Are we like European or Asian or both or none or neither, can we lay claim to some of the things that other communities can lay claim to, right? Because yeah.
No, absolutely. So I think we will not wait for Nishaant to rejoin, but we have posted for anyone who and I definitely encourage everyone to contact Nishaant. His contact institutional page, at least, is on the chat. And I'm just going to go one last time over our questions, because I think we more or less, there is one that I would still like to raise to Professor Ronald, if that is okay, if I go back to you. And then I think we can wrap up. And if you want to say some final comments, please feel free. So Professor Ronald, the last thing I would like to ask is, so someone thanks you deeply for the presentation. Could you please help us know if there is any link between colonialism as a phenomenon and introduction of word broken for papiamento, and also calling papiamento a Creole? So this is a question that is in the Ask a Question chat, like kind of box in the bottom part of your screen. It's one of the questions that is there, and I can try and put it up. So again, if there is any link between colonialism as a phenomenon and introduction of the word broken for papiamento, and also calling papiamento a Creole. So what is the link between colonialism and that? Yes.
Yeah, you sometimes hear those expressions, but it's not an issue anymore. And in the colonial times, I don't think it was part of the discourse, or even it was meant to. It was just the way people saw each other's language, and now it's not. It's politically incorrect to say something wrong about each other's culture or language. But the same things you saw also in Europe, because you were not allowed in Belgium in Parliament to speak Dutch, because that was not a real language. You should speak French. And now Belgium is divided in two sections, a French part and a Flemish part. And the same thing was in Holland. Rich people had governance in their homes to teach at home, and it was in French and not in Dutch. Dutch was not an important language. And so that was the way to look at each other culture and language. They were like the French culture or the German or the Italian culture. They were the high cultures in Europe. So it's not a thing for the relation, the colonists and the colonies, but I think it was very in general. And speaking of broken Spanish still, people say about patois in the Caribbean region and on the island itself. Let's say in Jamaica, it's one of the largest islands in the Caribbean, the ex-British island, but they're trying to put patois in school, but it's not so easy. While in Haiti, Haitian Creole, as they call it, Creole, is an official language. So there are different movements in every country, and the ways to look at the different and some very different minority languages. And I don't think it's the discourse of talking about colonies or metropoles. I don't think so. I think it's very general to say things about each other's way of living.
Yeah, absolutely. Kevin, would you like to say a couple of words before I start wrapping up?
I think what would be a meaningful angle to contribute based on for this question?
Well, I guess, I think it's just bringing awareness that I think many of us, we might not be a big majority, or we're definitely not a majority. We're very small communities. We're very unknown for a lot of people, but we are constantly having to reposition ourselves, and we have to rethink, do we want to keep these? We are aware of very entrenched colonial histories in our communities and the origins of the languages we're safeguarding. And when people talk about decolonization, for example, which is an extremely important perspective, how do we go forward with this? And how do we decide what to keep? Because in the end, these are the communities that we're dealing with. Many of us are speakers, mother tongue speakers, and in some ways we are having to take decisions on whether we should keep this or not. So perhaps, just an awareness raising point that this is something people are constantly doing every day, even though in some places in Europe, they're talking about, post-colonial context. But in many cases, it's not that easy, and it's not, the separation is not.
I get that. Yeah, it is difficult, and I guess because like Prof. Ron also mentioned, sometimes it's hard because there's that intertwining of the history. It's like some of the older Eurasians may feel strongly, for example, about religion, right? Because Catholicism is such a strong part of that identity for many older Eurasians. But many younger Eurasians who may not be religious then struggle with that, right? Like, do I want that to be part of my identity? And because it's hard to say what is post-colonial then, because it's such a fundamental part of, and even in the word Kristang, right?
Oh, exactly.
It's got like this triple meaning, which is race, religion, and language, right? In our community. So I don't really have answers there.
No, absolutely.
And it's I'm kind of envious of Prof. Ronald, because like every Papiamento seems a little more organized about certain things. So it is a struggle. It is a struggle, and I do agree. It is very nice to hear that actually it is negotiable, and in Curaçao and other places, that there is a way to kind of navigate it, and that is very heartening to hear.
So we are almost running out of time, and I would like to thank you, and also thank Nishaant, which I know he had a lot of internet issues, but I do again encourage people to please follow up by sending questions to him and to any of the panelists that we had today. And once again, today we spoke about something that I think remains extremely important to tackle, which is, how do we engage in safeguarding and sustaining, and how do we negotiate our relationships with these languages that we are dealing with and that are here with us, and hopefully they will continue to be here with us for quite some time. I also want to, again, bring awareness to, we are going into the decade of Indigenous languages, so these topics should constantly be spoken about, and to thank the panelists for being here. Thank you so much for being here today, and please do sign up for the discussion group. And I believe one of our members of the group, who's also called Nishaant, has just posted on the chat links. So I encourage everyone to please follow up on this, to join the groups in the future, and to not stop looking at languages. And please see if your community also has languages, see how you can be more involved, because this is a part of our identities that we constantly need to be renegotiating and supporting. Thank you, Professor Ronald, and thank you so much, Kevin, and thank you, Nishaant, who hopefully will be able to hear us in the future. We will be, thank you. We will be sharing the link for this as well. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Mariana, for being such a good chair.
And everything was so very well detailed. I loved it. Like, it was so clear.
No, thank you. And thank you so much for your time. So I will stop the broadcasting now. And thank you so much for the audience. Thank you for joining us and for sticking with us. So I will stop now.
Okay, thank you.